Hey Shamik, I'm finally getting around to making this tutorial for you about how to bounce stems from your Ableton project for you to mix. So I'm using a project that isn't actually mine. It's from the Minus label showcase. They released a bunch of projects where certain artists from their label had created these Ableton projects for you to play around with. So I'm just using this as an example because it's got a variety of different sounds in it that kind of are useful for doing this sort of thing. So I've organized the project into the component parts that make up the different stems in the way that I like to bounce them. So I've started with the kick drum at the top, and then we've got various other drum sounds, hi-hats, snare, various drum effects sounds here, and then down here the operator and mid bass. These are bass sounds. And here, synth, electric, voice from hell, or whatever the fuck that is, melody. These are all melodic sounds. And then finally, uplifter and wind. These are kind of two atmospheric sounds. So I've already categorized or sort of ordered the different sounds in the arrangement to make it easy and quick for me to bounce stems here. So basically an important thing to consider when we're bouncing stems is whether or not we want to include the processing that goes on the master output when we bounce these stems. So you may have put certain plugins or compression or limiting or EQ or whatever on the master bus, like this one has, you just need to decide whether or not you want to include that processing when you bounce the stems. You could bounce those stems with the processing included in them and then make a new project that has nothing on the master bus, or you could bounce the stems without the processing and then put those stems into a project that has the same processing on the master bus as the original project. It's up to you. But in this example, well, I guess I'll show both. I might as well show both. It's pretty easy to do. So if we were to, if we wanted to include the processing that goes on the master bus, as we have here, this EQ and some compression, what we would need to do is we would need to solo the kick channel because that's the stem that we want to create. But we're gonna record the master output because with the kick soloed, all we're hearing in the master output is, obviously, the kick. So that's what we want to record or render. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make a selection in the arrangement to tell Ableton how much material, how much audio material from where to where we want to bounce. So basically just make a selection like this and make sure it's long enough to include obviously all the content that you wish to bounce. And once we've made that selection, we can open the Export Audio Video dialog box under File, Export Audio Video, or Shift Command R. So now that we've done that, in the Rendered Track section here at the top, we can choose which track we want to render. Now, in the case of this scenario where we want to include the processing that's been done by the master bus, we need to choose the master as our source, or as the track that we're going to render. Now these other settings here, normalize we want to leave off, render as loop we want to leave off, and convert to mono. I mean, it's a kick drum, so actually we could convert it to mono, but in this situation I'm just going to leave it off. Okay, you can convert it to mono later if you want. And then here, file type, a sample rate and bit depth, well, these should stay at the same as the project that you were working in. And AIFF is, well, I mean, you could choose wave if you want. There's really no, I don't think there's really any difference or advantage between one or the other. And the sample rate, again, you should have been working in 44.1 kilohertz, so that should remain the same, 24 bits. Yeah, that's basically it. This video section you can ignore. So at the very bottom here, it's just giving you a little synopsis of what's about to happen. Live will render the output of the chosen track over the selected time range. Remember what we did here. So bar 1 to bar 233. So we click OK, and now we get a dialog box where we get to choose where we should put the stems. Now, should put the stems into the same project folder where you have been working on this particular project. So in this situation, I think these minus projects are under, where are they? Recording, singles, under factory packs, minus artists. Here we go. And this is Fabrizio Marizzi. Here's his project. I'm just gonna, in this situation, I'm just gonna make a new folder in the minus artists folder here. New folder, and I'm going to call it stems. And in here, maybe I'll do another new folder and call it Maurizio. Oh, sorry, Fabrizio. Maurizio. Just so we know what this is, right? So we've made folder, and in this folder, we're going to call this kick. That's what we need to do. Click save, and it is rendering the audio across these the time range. It's doing it faster than real time. Basically, it's just doing the calculations. Okay, so now that we've bounced out the kick stem, we can just keep going through the project and bounce out the other elements. So we've done the kick. Now the next thing I would do is just bounce out a stem for all the other percussive sounds. So we've got quite a few here. We've got this upbeat hi-hat, we've got the snare, what they call the clap, drum effects, 1, 2, 3. You know, let's just hit play here and listen. So it's pretty minimal, but let me just solo all the various different drum sounds that we've got going on. All kind of like little atmospheric noises. But they're all sort of drum sounds, so I'm considering these to be part of a set, basically. So the question is, now that we have these, we know which channels we want to bounce, what if we, so I could bounce the master bus again like we just did, because these tracks here are soloed, and that would work perfectly fine, and we could do that. But perhaps you don't want to bounce stems using the processing on the master bus, and perhaps you just want to bounce stems from the channel itself. Now the problem is we have, what, 6, 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different channels here, and we can only choose one channel as our source when we render the audio. So the solution here is to group these tracks. So select one, hold shift, click on the last one, and we've made a selection of tracks like this. And if we do Command G, we now group all of those sounds into one convenient channel, which we can rename, and I'll call this percussion, or perhaps I'll call it all perk. Okay, and this is our kick. So this channel here, called all perk, we can choose this channel as a source for bouncing, for rendering. So again, make sure that we have the time selected properly. And bear in mind that the really important thing is that all the stems start at the same points, even if there's silence at the very beginning. It doesn't matter if they end at the same point, because certain sounds might just drop out of the mix and never come back, in which case there's nothing wrong with you just finishing your stem a little early if you want to save hard drive space. But remember, very, very important that the start point is consistent in your stems. So we've made this selection in time, and now we do the same process as before, Command-Shift-R, and in this case we're going to choose render track. We want all perk, and there it is there, all perk. And when we click OK, it's going to bounce all the audio that comes out of this all perk channel, and is not going to include the processing that's going on the master bus. And again, leave normalize off and all that stuff. The reason you want to leave normalize off is because you already have a mix that's roughly close. So basically, when you bounce your stems, you want to be able to throw those stems back into a mixing project, and when you put them down, you just want to hit play, and you want things to sound basically how they were. And that's why you don't want to normalize, because if you normalize, then you're going to get you're going to get a skewed mix, and you would have to go back and rebalance the sounds. So here we are, we're bouncing out our percussion channel, and it's just doing some analysis, blah blah blah. So now that we've bounced out the percussion, we can just carry on as we did before, bouncing out the other elements. So here's the bass. Now we've got two bass synths. We've got operator and mid bass. I'd be inclined to just bounce these together, but perhaps you might want to bounce the sub bass all on its own as its very own channel, just as we did with the kick, and have the other bass sounds as its own stem. It's up to you. The reasons you would do one way or the other would vary from production to production. In this case, I'm just going to bounce them together. So again, make a selection, render, and this time, let's see, I'm going to solo those channels. Let's just hit play to make sure we're getting what we're supposed to be getting. Okay, so make a selection, render, and in this situation I've soloed the two bass channels, so I'm going to need to choose master, click OK, and call it bass. And we're going to do the same for the melodic sounds, so let's have a bit of these. Again, our selection in time has remained. It's kind of grayed out, but that selection is still there. As you can see, selected time range, 1 to 233. We're rendering the master track. We have the melodic sounds soloed. Usually for best practice, you should just check that things are indeed playing as you expect them to be. You're getting the sounds that you're expecting to get. You haven't accidentally soloed the kick, or you haven't accidentally soloed a bass sound to something that's not supposed to be in this stem. You may also want to perhaps isolate a particularly important melodic aspect of your track, say for example a vocal. You may want to bounce your vocal as a separate stem and have all the other melodic sounds as there are in another stem, just so that you can do, specific EQing or other effects or mixing on the vocal stem that is different from the rest of the melodic sounds. But in this case, there is no vocal. There's just some bleepy synths and whatever else. So I'm just going to bounce them all together as one stem. So make sure we have our time selected, like that. Render, master bus, click OK. Melod. And finally, the atmospheric sounds. Time is still selected. The atmospheric sounds have been soloed. And render, master, OK. Oops. Atmos. And that's it. That's all our stems have been bounced. So now what we need to do is basically create a new project and load those stems into it. So taking note of the tempo of the track here, I'm going to create a new project. I don't want to save this. And in the arrangement, I'm just going to get rid of these MIDI tracks like that. And we've got a bunch of audio channels. So how many stems did we bounce? Well, let's go back to Finder and have a look. We have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stems. Kick, perk, bass, melody, atmospheric. How many stems you bounce is entirely up to you. That's just how I did it in this scenario. So I want to have 5 audio channels, so let's make 3 more. And we can name them. Kick, and perk, and bass, melody, atmos. Okay? And now, bearing in mind that the track was at 127, put the Ableton's clock at 127 beats per minute as well. Another thing that you should do is turn off warping for long samples when you bring them in. Often Ableton, by default, will attempt to warp long samples as if you were perhaps bringing in a produced track. In this scenario, we don't want Ableton to warp them. You could unwarp them, but it just adds a little bit of extra time. because we're not trying to change the timing of these stems. We're working in the native in the native tempo that the track was produced in. So if we go into your preferences by doing command comma, and under the record warp launch pane, you want to make sure that auto warp long samples is off. I think by default it's on. Let's turn it off. So that means when we bring these stems in, Ableton isn't going to try and warp them. They're just going to be represented as faithfully as possible, right? So go back to Finder, and we can literally we can select them all and drag them in, although they're actually not in the correct order. So I'm going to do them one by one. So here's the kick. Here's percussion. Here is bass, melody, and atmospheric. So now, with all of these stems sitting here on the track, on their tracks, when we hit play, we should get a fairly accurate representation of the mix that we had in the project. One thing I noticed is that the first kick was a little off. So it seems to have warped these. But basically, as you can see, it's pretty much playing the track exactly as it was. The balance of the sounds is all correct. So at this point, you can obviously use these stems to add further EQing or compression or other effects, and it's just a very powerful way to simplify your projects, free up your CPU, and I do find that mixing stems and editing with stems just kind of, I don't know, it just adds an extra, level of quality to your production. So of course the other thing that you'll be doing is you will be taking your stems and converting them into clips, which you will then use to perform live. And the bouncing stems is really useful in that regard, because you're going to bounce stems that are that correspond to the different divisions of sounds that you have when you perform your tracks live. And when your stems are laid out like this, you can basically slice them up pretty easily just by making a selection over them in time and doing Command E. And so in this case, I've sliced these stems up into, 16-bar chunks. Perhaps maybe you want to work in 8-bar chunks, whatever, but I'm just kind of trying to do this quickly. So now we have a series of 16-bar chunks here, and what you would have to do, which is unfortunately a feature that Ableton has not created any kind of quick workaround for, is once you've sliced them up, you would actually need to tell each of them to loop current region. Absolutely each and every one of these has to have this function, loop current region, enabled, because without it, the tracks or the regions or the clips won't loop when you put them into your session view to perform them live. And I'll just kind of quickly demonstrate how you would get these quickly from your arranged view, which is the view we're in now, into session view. So I've just kind of performed the loop current region function on a bunch of sounds. I mean, there's actually nothing in either of these, so there's no point in even having them. We can just delete them. But this one does have a few little sounds, so let's loop current region there. Let's loop current region here. And here, I'm just going to do some of them and not all of them, and you'll see why it's bad to not do this. So we basically now have your track split up into a series of 16-bar sections. And if we select the first one on the kick channel and we hold Shift and we select the very last one and we've selected all of our clips, we can do Command C to copy, hit the Tab key, and we can paste in those clips in our session view, so Command V. And here now we have the track is now laid out in the session view, and we can play each scene, and it will basically represent the track as it was. Okay, so here we go, the track's playing, and you'll notice that down here we have these little pies to show that these clips are looping, but this one here isn't going to loop. That's because I didn't perform the loop current region function. So we need to do that, loop current region. And now, when it reaches the end of the loop, it's going to loop again. 2, 3, and 2, sorry. 2, 3, and loop. Okay? Whereas if we play the next scene, you can see, because I haven't performed loop current region on these other tracks here, they're going to run out. And that's no good. So, unfortunately, you have to laboriously, manually go through each and every one of these and do the loop current region function. And it's really annoying because you can't make a multiple selection and do loop current region. It just doesn't work like that. So, I think that's pretty much all you need to know. I hope this has been useful. If you've got any questions or problems, hit me up over emails or Facebook or whatever. Cheers.